So we talked about tenants on the ACI network. And a tenant is close to a VDC, but it's a little bit different. As I mentioned before, a VDC logically carves up a physical switch, whereas with a tenant, we're actually logically carving up the whole fabric, which can be multiple switches across the network. We use a concept called context, or VRF. These are the same terms that we use in a normal Nexus deployment, and by default, a Nexus device comes with a default context and a management context. With ACI, you have to create at least one VRF or context for every tenant that you create. We talked a little bit about a bridge domain, and a bridge domain controls how Layer 2 in multicast acts for the group of devices that are using that bridge domain. And a bridge domain basically contains the subnet or the switched virtual interface or the default gateway for a particular group of devices that are using that bridge domain. We then take that bridge domain and we divide it up into endpoint groups. For instance, if I have a server subnet where all of my servers reside in, I can actually take that server subnet and I can take the Exchange servers and I can put them in one group. And I can take the SAP servers and I can put them in another endpoint group. They're still on the same subnet, they're still using the same default gateway, but now I'm taking these servers and I'm putting them into groups. And based on what group they belong to, I can then control what they have access to, or whether or not they can talk to each other, like a private VLAN. So based on my endpoint group, I take devices and I put them into these groups. And then based on which group they belong to, I use what we call a contract to control which group of devices should be able to talk to another group of devices. So a contract is very similar to an access list, and it controls how devices talk to other devices on the network. Once I have created this policy model, I'm most likely going to want to let my ACI network talk to my existing network. And I do that through what we call a Layer 2 out, or a Layer 2 external endpoint group, and a Layer 3 out, or a Layer 3 external endpoint group. And these are synonymous to, for instance, a trunk link between two switches in a normal network, or a Layer 3 routed link between two switches in a normal network. So I can take my application-centric infrastructure, I can set it up with my different tenants and at least one VRF, at least one bridge domain or more, and then endpoint groups underneath those bridge domains. And then I can control how my endpoint groups talk to each other, as well as link my ACI fabric to my existing network via a Layer 2 connection like a trunk, which we call a Layer 2 external connection, or a Layer 3 routed link called a Layer 3 external link. So a lot of these concepts relate back to what we do in traditional networking, but are very similar in ACI. Please join me for our next lesson, 10.3, Examining Endpoint Groups.